Both Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re have gone through this incredible evolution process from the beginning of 2011 to the mid-half of 2018. The story as we know it has been phenomenal. It's been an experience, and reading it week by week was such a joy. I thought it would be a good idea to kind of compare the two, or at least evaluate Sue Ishida's process of evolution and the change that has happened over so many years, from the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul, which released in 2011, to its ending in 2018, and what's it like now going into 2020. One of the most interesting things about Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re is the fact that they're split up into two completely different stories. It definitely would be wrong of me to say that the original TG and TG Re are the exact same experience, because they are not. They're written in completely different ways, and they've changed a lot of different things. Its characters, its concepts, and a lot of its theme and atmosphere has evolved or shifted in a different direction to tell a different story, to experience a different narrative from a different perspective. Starting off with Tokyo Ghoul, the focus on psychological horror was the biggest selling point for the series. It's what drew people in. Over the time frame of Tokyo Ghoul's release, which is around about 143 chapters, you see the steady progress of the psychological elements be played upon more and more. So where Ishida dives into these ideas and concepts, the more he fleshes them out, the more they embody his own characters and even himself. The way he approaches it, the way he symbolizes it, started off incredibly strong at the beginning, but over time the execution of it just became a lot more refined, and the impact and the weight behind it, because of the context that we have, makes for a compelling experience. I think looking at Sue Ishida's artwork and how he kind of approaches things in a very methodical but symbolic type of way is something that he's expanded upon time and time again. Throughout Tokyo Ghoul, he set this basis of symbolism with the tarot cards and a lot of these flowers that resemble a lot of different things, and have these symbols connecting to different characters, connecting to a story arc, connecting to emotion and even future actions. A lot of our theories were based around this stuff, and it was really intuitive on his behalf. It wasn't necessarily obnoxious, it wasn't played upon 24/7. It was similar to an Easter egg, something that you would kind of spot throughout the chapter, hidden away very nicely, and you would expand upon it from there. Usually be a number or a symbol or a type of flower, and with a little bit of research you would come to understand this stuff. A lot of this would come a lot more heavily and a lot more detailed later on within the story. It's definitely in there from the beginning, but when you have a bit of context and understanding of the world, the characters, the emotion and everything in between, definitely dictates your perspective and how you want to unravel these ideas and theories. And I think that's one of the most compelling things about Tokyo Ghoul subconsciously that a lot of people don't actually realize, is that if you were lucky enough to read this series week by week, you would find yourself exploring so many different ideas and so many different possibilities, not necessarily on the basis of what the story is going with and what the characters are doing, but more so how this symbolism connects to this character, or how these tarot cards mean this and mean that, and the future that they actually tell. I wouldn't say it's necessarily rare for a series to foreshadow its events with symbolism, but when you use symbolism in such a way where it's emotional, it's impactful, but also can be used for foreshadowing and theory crafting, you pretty much have everyone on the edge of their seats every single chapter looking for the smallest of details, and it creates these very interesting dynamics between people where some will find stuff and others will overlook stuff, but then in the middle you would have people that would find stuff that meant absolutely nothing, but because of the idea of something being there, they would latch onto it. This growth in symbolism is what carries the backbone of Tokyo Ghoul, directly reflects into Ishida's artwork and how he portrays his characters in very specific ways. The types of flowers that he uses, the types of locations, and even his paneling work, his artwork has drastically improved. And when you connect all of this stuff with the psychological elements and the quote-unquote horror part of it, you get this obviously compelling story with these very interesting and depthly characters. In a sense, Tokyo Ghoul doesn't necessarily expand all too far out. It expands on itself over and over again, almost like it's overlapping overlapping itself every single time, but with each time it overlaps, it becomes a lot more refined and the execution becomes a lot more crisp and the detail and the weight behind it just becomes incredible. It's not trying to tell a story that is out of its reach. It doesn't create these everlasting branches that create theories or paradoxes that last 1,000 plus chapters. It sticks within its own world, its own realm, and it refines it to a T. And Soei Ishida over the years has done an incredible job with that, exploring and expanding upon the psychological developments of his character, and specifically Kaneki being such a middleman for all of this stuff. Everything circles around him. He is the center, he is the pillar. So seeing his development, seeing his change results in the development of different symbolism and different tarot cards, and it's something that reflects over time extremely well. If you go back and read the first chapter and then go back and read the finale of Tokyo Ghoul, you'll definitely see a massive difference in artwork quality, but you'll also see that emotion portrayed a little bit differently. You'll see the symbolism a lot more refined and portrayed in a more specific type of way instead of throwing it in there very loosely for people to guess. The most interesting thing about the Tokyo Ghoul franchise for me is that even though Tokyo Ghoul refines itself over and over again, when it gets to its finale and jumps into Tokyo Ghoul Re, everything that Tokyo Ghoul was is kind of set in stone. The stories definitely branch into one another, but they are two completely different stories. It's not like Tokyo Ghoul starts to drift off, break into Tokyo Ghoul Re. It's almost two completely separate entities. You could read the story separate and they'd tell a completely different story. Obviously, the context for a lot of things and the impact and the emotion you'd have for a lot of characters from Tokyo Ghoul wouldn't be the same if you just read Tokyo Ghoul Re without reading its predecessor. And you could do that vice versa. Without even reading Tokyo Ghoul Re, you could stop at Tokyo Ghoul and pretty much be well and truly satisfied with that ending. Tokyo Ghoul Re is a change. It's something that in itself symbolizes Soei Ishida's progression as an artist, as an author, and something else entirely. The way he approaches his story is completely different. It's new, it's unorthodox, it's nothing like Tokyo Ghoul. And this is where a lot of people seemingly get confused because they think it's a continuation, but it's a separate entity. Kaneki is a completely different person. His perspective has changed and the writing around him has changed. The other characters within him, the people that we're focusing on in terms of the CCG, the artwork has drastically improved. There is such a massive gap between the end of Tokyo Ghoul to the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul Re. It almost seemed extremely planned and spaced out so Soei Ishida wouldn't release his style of artwork or even his writing until Tokyo Ghoul Re. Tokyo Ghoul Re and its development over the years has a very similar situation to the original. It doesn't try to branch off into many different directions. Instead, it brings forth a couple of new ideas while continuously refining the previous ones and jumping back to the previous ones. Jumping back to Kaneki, exploring the whole One-Eye King fiasco, the implementation of Dragon and Furuta, the V organization. There's definitely things that are added, but they are grounded within its own story. Considering there is an abundance of more characters that get spotlight, the growth of them is both incredibly enjoyable but incredibly different. Considering Kaneki is still our main character, but his development has already been fleshed out over 143 chapters, we shift to a different cast and focus on them a lot more. And it's a big reason why Mitsuki, for example, for me, one of my favorite characters within the story, as a character that has a problem with their own sexual orientation, how Soei Ishida used that as such a scarily compelling psychological component that warped and twisted Mitsuki. Just a character was incredibly portrayed. I know a lot of people dislike that character, but for me, one of, if not the best within Tokyo Ghoul Re. Not to mention the rest of the main cast that get a decent amount of spotlight, obviously shying away from Kaneki, but then ultimately reeling us back in towards Kaneki and focusing on him again. The nature of the story shifts in its entirety, considering we're seeing it from the perspectives of CCG, which is the first time that this is happening, and then we start trickling into the more global scheme of things. The moral concept is played upon a lot more heavily, where it's more so personal in Tokyo Ghoul. In Tokyo Ghoul Re, the moral confliction and whether ghouls should be killed or exiled or subjugated, whatever it may be, these ideas come across a lot more openly. And within a lot of different characters that have power, that have weight, that have say. Sui Ishida's artwork doesn't necessarily change all too much throughout Re. The biggest jump is comparing Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re to one another in terms of their artwork. I think the biggest differences between the two is how the artwork is very specific to that narrative, whereas Tokyo Ghoul is psychological horror. Sui Ishida's artwork is a lot more gritty. It's a lot more sporadic and all over the place, and it actually reflects both Kaneki, his emotions, and the internal struggle very heavily. It's used extremely well. I feel like Ishida 100% used that to his advantage on how sporadically and kind of abstractly he drew. Whereas in Tokyo Ghoul Re, it was a lot more simplistic and refined. It still had very sporadic moments, but those in itself were a lot more detailed than the original. And I feel like that reflects Tokyo Ghoul Re in a very mature way, that this character has grown a lot, that we're focusing on the sophisticated side of the CCG, but when it does get to the dark, compelling stuff and the internal struggle, it's not all over the place. It's eerily grim and very grotesque, but it's not as sporadic as the original, which is something that I appreciate, the balance between the two. It's almost like two completely different experiences. The stories are in components pretty different, the characters are different, and the way the artwork depicts the symbolism, the emotion, and their characters and everything in between is also inherently different, and it creates these two very unique experiences that entwine very beautifully together. As much as you may like one series over another, that's perfectly fine, but I think the best experience when it comes to Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re is how you can experience both of these stories and feel so completely different about one another. Whether you like TG or TG Re, what is fundamental throughout all of it is that it's an experience and that they all intertwine with one another. Yeah, you could read them separately, but to get the emotional response, to get the context, to get the understanding, you need both of them. They play off one another, they evolve with one another. Seeing Sui Ishida's journey over the years and how he felt about Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, and how his artwork has developed, how he's focused on these characters in so many different ways and how they've changed and adapted, has been such an incredible experience. For me, it's been an incredible journey, and for a lot of you, it's probably most definitely been an incredible journey also. I don't know what Sui Ishida wants to do next, but Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, I think, is something that we all hold very close to our hearts. So with that being said, that is basically it. Let me know how you feel about Tokyo Ghoul and or Tokyo Ghoul Re and how it's changed over the years. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. But I'm actually going to end the video off here. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.